Ladies and gentlemen, let's start. So we start the cultural section, which is devoted to cultural sphere and space and its measurement. And I'm happy to invite to the stage our speakers and panelists, Victor Wachstein, head of chair theoretical sociology, Russian Academy of Sciences. So he's a leading sociologist of Russia, and currently he represents the work done for the government of Moscow, and he determines the cultural strategy. So he's in charge of our executive. Richard Naylor, director, department, research, BOP consulting. Robert Eysoldt, co-founder and creative director, Berlin, Great Berlin, consultant, creative communications. Hila Oren, general director, Tel Aviv Global City. And Alexander Dolgin, professor, High School of Economics, Pragmatics and Culture Chair. And Irina Prokhorova, well, I don't think we should introduce her. Everybody knows her. Chief editor, New Literary Review. So the agenda today is inside the Urban Forum. So the agenda today is that, well, there is a view that for a quality development of cities, culture and infrastructure of culture in the cities is one of the decisive factors, though we do not really understand the way it happens. And it's very difficult for us to translate it into a piece of knowledge to be measured by something similar to budget numbers or transport flow or traffic. That's why we introduced the measurement index for the cultural environment, trying to solve what it is. Before giving the floor to our speakers, I would like to first make some introduction. Please show us the first presentation. Just for you to understand what we are dealing with. So here is what I'm showing now is a dome of the White House. It's the George Washington's. It's a nice picture. I love it. Well, we have quite a story and iconographics of George Washington, him talking to peasants, engines, the military, and he's bringing the light of reason to educate the people, and they become better citizens. And as a result, in the dome of the White House, there's a picture. He's going up, ascending to the skies, and at the rear, there are different areas of human activities, wars, science, agriculture, industry, transformed by the light of reason. Next slide, please. So I can do it with this thing here. Okay. But what happened here, well, similar story, in fact, in Russia. So, respectively, this is the way the Russian people looked at in 1899. It's Philip Malavin, laughter. Then the light of reason came down in a different way. And so here is the way it was expressed. And then goes the educated people, mostly enlightened, resembling or to what is depicted in the dome of or cupola of the White House, engaged in some positive activities. So that was the main pattern or model of culture and the infrastructure of culture we currently have in our city. The main sense of the culture is purely instrumental in this way. It's the way of translating or transferring a person from non-enlightened to a more ideal state of mind. Okay. And we have to measure the scale of the infrastructure, when we saw, like Yandex cannot show more than 200 theaters, for instance, and the blue dots that are not ticked depicting additional theaters. So that's the amount of those things here. So those are the houses of culture in the territory of the city of Moscow. It's a giant infrastructure to transform people from one state to another. So those are the libraries. Those blue dots are galore. So it's just cities or towns and cities comparable in number with the industrial facilities in the territory of Moscow or any other like infrastructure like transport. It's a gigantic material asset. The objective today is not quite clear-cut. Well, the idea was education, which shows a natural person that represents man, and then Minerva, which is education, but by Botticelli, and then an enlightened citizen, educated, and here you can see that educated citizen. What shall we do with all this when the situation suddenly changes? It's clear that there's no objective to transform a human being from one of his status to another. So there's none. So then there's a question, why do we need the infrastructure? There is an option. For instance, one is just a sphere of services, and people will have to pay for the culture. And here I expect comments from Mr. Dolgin, who has developed the theory of the market existence of culture and culture realia. So far, what we can see is that culture is not really much needed. And as for payback, it's just self-payback. It cannot exist. But there's another option. For instance, if we think that it can generate some revenues in indirect markets, for instance, if the culture is at a high level, then our transport and, I don't know, maybe city management, and in this case, communal services are improved in a way, but no direct hopes that it would really happen. It does happen, that's true, but the problem here is that if the benefit can be seen in indirect markets, then it's not quite clear how you would distribute the revenues. In this case, I showed Danai, for instance, a golden rain falling not exactly in the place it was designed to. And the beneficiary of the process is not exactly the person or not the institution which initially wanted to generate some revenue from that. And another option, moving in non-market direction, just thinking that we do need the culture and we have to support this culture. But in this case, when we do it in non-market, then it's contra-natural. So someone should contradict or confront the will of the market. And thus, by the end of the day, it so happens that the will of one human being is the decision that is demonstrated by Mr. Kryshkov, so surrounded by different cultural activists. Another option, when Mr. Lushkov, well, if we get together in big councils, groups, so far the number of people trying to not erase all the money aimed at what should be regulated. In this or that case, we just don't understand what we should do with this huge infrastructure we have at our disposal. And in this case, it seems to me that both Berlin and Tel Aviv experience and the experience of global cities can explain. Well, on the one hand, we have a giant cultural legacy, not quite clear what to do with it and how to use. The only way of work we have is actually the way of working in educated absolutism.
When culture actors should meet the leader and his presence will enlighten the whole cultural environment. But the thing is that there are lots of cultural actors out there, and the leader should, he has his own responsibilities and lots of things to do, and he cannot meet all the cultural actors we have. So how it should exist in today's city and how it impacts today's city, it's a challenge indeed. And during our session, I think we could, I don't have an answer to this question, and I hope we will find it at the end of this session. And now I would like to give the floor to Viktor Semenovich Vakstein. He's going to tell us how the government of Moscow is dealing with all these things. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you very much for your invitation. Sergey Kapkov should have been sitting here instead of me, and he could explain it better how to meet the challenges of today's Moscow and how the Department of Culture of Moscow does it and deals with these things. But, I am an expert who carries out the research for the Department of Culture, and articulating the results of the research, I must make a step into strategy, into political decision making, and formulating, articulating outputs. But Grigoriy put a great question: what's the alternative for enlightened absolutism? In our reality, the alternative is not enlightened feudalism, a situation where not the leader meets all prominent culture actors, but afterwards appoint them at various places. But the situation where it looks like half a kingdomship or something autonomous, and autonomies that are represented by various elites. And evidence-based policy is the approach here, might be an approach here. Very bright sociological evidence-based policies. That's what we should do, I think we should deal with. Can I have this this sign of authority in our enlightened absolutism? Give me this stick. So let's start with an academic question Richard and me are concerned about. We as politicians, when we have to make decisions in the cultural sphere and its strategic development, or when we as researchers try to create adequate instruments of its measurements, we should think of culture as something isolated and living on its own. Otherwise, it's hard to work with the whole thing. And the problem was very nicely outlined by the previous speaker. Culture is not a sphere like that so far today. It's not institutional, it's not isolated or economically viable thing that lives on its own in a homogenic conditions. No, the problem is that culture today is something very dispersed and something, it's like part of other subsystems. Lots of other subsystems are included into her. And speaking about economy, Moscow is a paradoxical thing in terms of its economic development and its living conditions. It's one of the it's in the top 5 of the most expensive cities in the world. This example of 1 liter of milk is very illustrative. And livability index, Moscow is at is at the bottom of the list of other cities across the world. But we have lots of advances in economic development, but the living conditions are not so prominent, and it is manifested by various research I actually do. And 31% of people who live here do not think that this is a very nice city to live in. And when we ask them, where do you want to spend your money, they say in St. Petersburg, and people living who lived here for about 10 years, they plan to leave the city for other cities abroad. That's what the polls show. it is the fact that 60% of Muscovites say that they are not Muscovites. They do not see themselves as Muscovites, actually. So Moscow as a city, as a single thing, as a community, you know, it's hard to call a community today. And the challenges of culture are also different. You cannot manage culture in a city which doesn't think of it as a city, and it's an element of a completely different system of relations. But what are these relations about? And the starting point here is that we go from culture of institutions to culture of relations. And culture is not a bunch of theaters and other institutions which actually receive money from the budget. Culture is a basis for social capital, for social relations. And when the polls are conducted, like we have just completed, or another poll which is coming to its completion today, you know, we look at the level of social relations between people and how many contacts you have in your notebook, and how many people you have when you leave the city to nurse your children or your pets and so on. And also a question: if you die tomorrow, how many people will come to your funeral? So you know, it's about the density of your social relations and the trust and the level of trust in the city you live in. And in Moscow, you know, David Revzin has published a book, The Lonely Crowd, 50 years ago. You know, Moscow is a lonely crowd today, and what we should change in the cultural sphere, we should, when we think about it, we should think in terms of relations between people, and how people set up trusting relations, and about social capital, and how to make this city attractive in terms of living conditions. And it's not only a challenge for the Department of Culture, but we will also speak about how cultural institutions can participate in the process. And what we see today is that relations with other people is the main driver for visiting cultural institutions, because people go there to meet their friends and to spend time with their children and relatives and so on. So it's an institution for social contacts, and that's the foundation. That's the foundation for, you know, this decision to go somewhere, to theater or somewhere else. And for instance, this poll, this research in London, cultural audit, that was conducted in 2012, and it shows how cultural needs are distributed of those who live in London. When we say that Moscow is number 4 in terms of expensiveness of life, but we should say that cultural needs of Moscow can be comparable with those of other megacities. And number 2 is theaters, and number 1 is museums for us. But how do these needs how do they met? And you know, 30% of those of Muscovites visit cultural institutions. But speaking about other cultural needs, the main two of them, cultural events. That's the point. An event is what matters for people. You know, events, that's what people want. And of course, cultural environment, that's what they want also. This hope that when you go out, you will like what you see around. And parks here is very relevant. Parks are both institutions, cultural institutions, and public spaces and venues for various interesting events. So this demand for entertainments, events, and environment, that's the main two things that are relevant today. We do not have adequate community events. You know, neighborhood, it's hard to translate, even to translate it into Russian, because this term doesn't tell anyone anything. And neighborhoods, you know, it's just administrative units for people. And the number of social connections, that's the main thing that correlates with cultural demands of people. So the cultural demand is very serious, and and the more you are embedded into this social relations system, the more you are interested in cultural things. And people live in their neighborhoods, and sometimes they do not leave them for years. And people just live in their neighborhoods not because it's hard for them to get to the city center, but because they do not know what to do there and why they should go there. You know, I'm keeping up with my slides. I'll skip a couple of slides now. And the activeness of cultural life. If we look at the map of Moscow and try to analyze where do Muscovites spend their time, and where are these events, where do they take place, and we can see that they are concentrated. I speak about events mainly. So they are concentrated in the central administrative unit, in the city center, and that's how the main events map look like. That's the data of the previous year. And when we try to assess culture, to measure culture, and we're speaking about it today, you know, to do adequate decision making, you should conduct adequate social measurement. We can see that everything is concentrated in the city center, and the city environment, the city lacks adequate environment, and the environment is not adequate, and all events are concentrated in the city center. And yes, this is a territorial deprivation. We didn't know a term like that before. So that's what formulates our agenda, and the Moscow city government will have to do something with that. The cultural department as well. But what are the answers here? This general trust. Your system of social contacts will impact where you go and how much time you spend there, and actually the fact that you have or do not have this time to spend somewhere. And trust to people, not only trust to people you know, but trust to the environment you live in. General trust level, according to the Eurobarometer, it is going up while if you're away of Moscow. You know, each 100 kilometers from Moscow means that people trust each other more, and, for instance, can let their children go for a walk and not think that something might happen with them. And the far from Moscow you are, the further you are, the better this trust level is. It's this environment we have today is not perceived by people as something friendly and safe. General trust indicator. It's it's a general index, and you can only understand how comfortable the city is for living in it, and the role of culture institutions, and their contribution, and the contribution of culture events into this general trust index. Understanding this place as a place and identity of this place and your own identity, we can see lots of interesting processes underway today when neighborhood libraries of Moscow, they become community centers step by step, and becoming these points of crystallization of local communities. And culture venues start acting as sites for new professional communities creation. And what we are going to do in the culture department of Moscow is to bring up, to increase this contribution of culture institutions and culture sites into this general trust index. And what makes Moscow? Culture venues won't be number one on your list, but the goal is to make it number one, and to make it more comfortable, to make the city more comfortable, and through a more active participation in the process of those culture agents that are now cooperating with the Department of Culture of Moscow. Thank you very much for your attention. Let me ask you a question. As far as I understood your logic, you base on the following. Since people visit culture venues with the family and friends, then the more venues we have and the more active they are, the more friends and the stronger families we will have. It's an interesting question. If the goal of the culture department is to increase social capital, then your logic looks like this: let them work more active, and thus people. And people will have more friends, and more marriages will take place in Moscow. But it doesn't mean that it'll look like this. They might meet each other in other places and afterwards go to culture venues. It's not actually like this. If they work more actively, for instance, if they work during night time, but the night of museums is not an instrument of reproduction of the population of the city. The thing is that intensification of their work, it mightn't bring serious changes overnight. But today we can see that development of culture environment of the city is something that should happen. Our goal is to first of all, make these culture venues more active in formulating this city environment, and we want to do it not just through intensification of their work, but the character of but the nature of what they do. Culture is about events, more events, and better networks of cooperation between culture venues and other venues. Culture should not be isolated. That's what's important. And all these steps aiming at decentralization and creation of various venues at the outskirts of Moscow, all these things will contribute to better social capital and better city environment. But it doesn't mean that if we conduct the Night of Museums each Tuesday, everything will change overnight. No, it doesn't work like that. And question number 2, the presentation was quite quickly articulated, but who is excluded into the culture life? If we include bachelors of 65 plus years old, if we include and pensioners, it'll better the social capital, right? Yes, that's right. Thank you very much.
And what is the way it works? Well, I don't think we should start the discussion, but I think that the position is quite clear now. Well, it is thought that it would increase the social capital. Well, Alexander, when you speak up, you can doubt it, because I do have some doubts about it. Well, now, Richard Naylor, director of BOP Consulting. And I hope that we will understand how it is all done in a civilized world. Well, how surprising it is there.
So I'd start to say what a pleasure it's been to be involved in the session. I come to a lot of these kinds of events, but it's very rare to find such a diversity of participants. So it's been really stimulating so far, and I hope this session will continue that train. Just an opening remark about my company. We are a research consultancy company that specializes in culture and the creative industries. We built up our knowledge in the UK, but we work internationally. And I guess moving on from Victor's expression, what we do really is we develop kind of evidence-based policies and plans for governments, city governments, national governments, for foundations and trusts, for cultural organizations, and for property developers. Okay, so one of the things that we've done as a company over the last 5 years that we've been asked to do by clients is to take on this tricky task of measuring cultural environments. We've done it in a range of different contexts for a range of slightly different purposes. But I'm just going to talk about one of these projects today, and this is something called the World Cities Culture Report. Okay, so this was a project that was launched in the summer during the Olympics in London, and it's initially an initiative of the Mayor of London, and it actually builds on some work that we did for the Mayor of London back in 2008, which was started out, interestingly, by the Mayor of London, well, one of his team, reading a paper from Shanghai about the cultural competitiveness of Shanghai. And this set him thinking about what was London's role in terms of culture in relation to its status as a world city. So what we did in this project in 2012 was a much bigger project. So it went from being 5 cities to 12 cities, the cities listed. And crucially, it wasn't just a project of the Mayor of London. It was a collaborative research and policy project which was shared across 9 of those 12 cities. So just starting out with the big question, really, of how to measure the cultural environment. Kind of where to start with measuring culture? Well, I think our kind of pragmatic starting point is to use the UNESCO definition of culture. UNESCO acknowledges that there is a material and an immaterial dimension to culture, and a tangible and an intangible. But in terms of measurement, the measurement invariably lends itself towards measuring the tangible. Another thing that the definition provides is a set of domains that are demarcated, if you like, are identified as culture, which helps you to put some boundaries around what we mean by culture. The second sort of bedrock to the framework and the report is a paper that was proposed from the OECD in 2007, which was to develop a culture satellite account, which was a framework for developing a system of indicators to measure the contribution of culture. But just taking a step back for a second, why do policymakers and other actors in cities and countries ask us to measure culture? I guess the question here is, why is it so difficult? Where's the pain, as one of my fellow directors always says? Setting aside some of the philosophical debates about can you measure the arts and culture, some of the statistics that you might want to use, there isn't that much of a problem getting hold of them. So, for instance, if you just want to look at labour market statistics about the number of people who work in the cultural sector, provided you can define what the cultural sector is, generally that's covered quite well in national statistics. But there are a whole host of other problems that exist, particularly granularity, and by which I mean how detailed you want to be when you look at culture. And if you're a cultural policymaker or a cultural organization, you need detail. So you need to know, for instance, about live music. In statistics, that would be bundled up with performing arts, which is very different. A more fundamental problem with statistics is, and how they relate to the cultural sector, is this idea of mixed use. So a lot of the venues that are used to program, present cultural and artistic work are not actually culturally dedicated and culturally specific venues. Particularly in cities, it's a key part of the cultural infrastructure, is this informal cultural infrastructure, whether it's pubs or bars or community centres. And that kind of runs counter to the logic of official statistics classifications, which has a logic of exclusivity. Things can only be defined as one purpose. There are then a whole series of other sort of indicators that are simply missing from government statistics. So whether you're looking at output, whether you're looking at demand, whether you're looking at some of the more informal elements of culture. And all of these problems get magnified when you look at a smaller geographical level than the nation. So they become particularly difficult when you look at cities. So official government statistics don't do culture very well. But then, alternately, when we look at city-based measures of culture, so we look at the many kinds of city indexes that we all know about, whether it's the PwC index, the Mercer Quality of Life Index in cities, the Urban Age Index, if you're interested in culture, they're actually largely absent in these indexes. You'll be lucky to get one indicator, which is usually an employment indicator because it's easy to get. And at most, you'll get 2 or 3. So I guess as a result, the challenge is that you have an incredibly important facet of city life that is very poorly covered in existing statistical measures and classifications and indexes. And that's really sort of where the background for the World Cities Project comes from. So just to give you a bit of a feel now in the next couple of slides as to what kinds of data is in the World Cities Report. First of all, it's more than 60 indicators, so immediately you move from having 2 or 3 indicators to having more than 60. So it's very broad in its coverage. The kinds of indicators we cover are these that are circled in the diagram. So they're mainly covering what we call kind of cultural infrastructure, so the venues and the spaces and places by which culture is produced and presented. And then on the other hand, the audience dimension, the demand, the consumption, and the participation in culture by people, communities, and groups. As for kind of what culture is defined as, again, we take the UNESCO definition, which has culture defined in sort of 5 domains, which are down the right-hand side. But what we added to that was what we call kind of transversal domains, so cross-cutting domains, really, which is to try and get a feel for the culture in the places. So to try and get a feel of some of these more intangible elements of culture, about cultural vitality and about cultural diversity. So this is just a couple of the tables from the report. As you'll see, it's fairly straightforward kinds of data. So on the top, it's cultural heritage, and you're looking at number of museums, number of art galleries, attendances at art galleries and museums. The bottom set of indicators relates to what we kind of call cultural diversity and vitality, again, ranging through from, if you like, what's sometimes called the new leisure infrastructure, which is about bars and nightclubs, also includes kind of restaurants, because food cuisine is very important to culture, but also looks at some of the people dimension. So it looks at numbers of foreign students, it looks at the percentage of people that are born outside the city. Now, obviously, part of the way we deal with the context and the importance of context, which I'll come back to, is about dealing with size. So a lot of these indicators are scaled, whether they're against population, against purchasing power parity, against GDP per head. In terms of where the data comes from, it comes from a range of sources. So government statistics, yes. Depending on the city administration, it becomes either a smaller or a greater part of the data. From industry and trade associations, quite a lot of the data comes from there. And for some types of indicators, we get the data, we draw it from listings, magazines, directories, and sites, or from business databases. Kind of reflecting a bit more about some of the challenges of measuring culture. These are really the challenges that we've encountered from doing this internationally and doing an international comparative analysis and doing it twice, I guess. So we're able to kind of look back over both activities. So the first challenge is really conceptual, and it's about capturing how culture is produced and consumed differently in different societies. Obviously, we start off as Western Europeans. The framework in which we start from tend to be Western-centric as well, such as the OECD. But as you go around cities, you realize that culture is produced and consumed in very different ways. So capturing that is a real challenge. How have we approached that challenge in the World Cities Report? Well, sort of three ways, two of which are on the slide. The first is to ensure a very wide range of indicators. So we have everything from, we talked about some of those kind of more informal elements of culture, through to traditional high culture, through to kind of popular entertainment, through to cultural heritage, and indeed natural heritage. So we look at the proportion of the city that's given over to green spaces and parks. We don't impose hierarchies and rankings and indicators. And that, I think that sets apart what we do in our report and our process from some of those other city indexes. And I think that that's partly to understand that you're not comparing the time it takes to get from the main airport to the city centre, the crime record in a city. These things are very standard to classify when you're looking internationally. Culture is much more difficult and much more fine-grained, and therefore we have to understand that the data we're using is often the best proxy that we can get. The third way in which we approach it is to keep searching for new indicators. We've added to the indicator set from the first time we did it to now, and we will keep on doing that. And I think this is important to understand that this is actually a new process. It's a kind of frontier of kind of data making. And that's the important point here. Data is made, it's not found. So 30 years ago, people thought you couldn't measure well-being. 30 years on, it's very well understood in terms of the methodology and how you would go about doing that. The second set of challenges are essentially operational. Firstly, it's about getting comparable aerial units. We tend to draw on the metropolitan area region, but the other dimensions of this are more difficult. So it's about getting the availability and the quality and the comprehensiveness of data. And there are a range of things that you have to look for here. So often some of the trade statistics are based on membership. So they're very good at reporting data on their members, but if you want to know what the whole theatre sector in London, as opposed to just those theatres that are members of the Society of London Theatres are doing, it's much more difficult. So again, kind of two of our solutions. It's a two-part solution. Firstly, it's about engaging local partners who will be able to give you that insight and intelligence onto what the data is lacking and where it plays very well. And secondly, it's to kind of maintain some centralized quality control and comparability across the different cities. Okay, just a very quick slide about some top-level issues and kind of messages that came out of the report. Firstly, the cities in old Europe, as we describe them, which in this case is London, Paris and Berlin, play very well across the widest range of indicators. That's not really surprising, given they're some of the more established cities in the data set. But already what's interesting is that emerging economies are kind of coming to the fore on some of the indicators. What's been interesting for us, reflecting on the process with our partners, is that the cities are interested in different bits of the data, different bits of those 60 indicators, but they all find something that's really telling. A really important point through the policy process was that cities are perhaps surprisingly interested, from our point of view, I think, in the emotional and spiritual and expressive role of cities, of culture in cities, the way, for instance, it's helped their citizens and their cities deal with kind of major city-level traumas, whether this was 9/11 in New York, the tsunami in Tokyo, well, in Japan, or the bombings in London just before the Olympics were announced. And I guess this leads into the most important point on this slide, which is data is not enough. You need a context, you need narrative to understand and interpret that. And this process of knowledge sharing is very, very useful. So just to wrap up, really, the process that we've engaged on in this report is going forward. So the founding cities actually found the process of the knowledge exchange and the data gathering process so useful that they felt it filled a real gap, because cities meet at a global level. World cities meet regularly in fora, which is about discussing transport, about discussing the environment, housing, the economy. But before this process, there was really nothing, no forum by which they could talk about issues of how to do culture in world cities. So the founders are keeping this collaboration going as the World Cities Culture Forum. It will have an annual meeting going forward. And kind of facilitated by us, we will be actively looking for new members, of which we would be delighted if Moscow came on board. And the big next benchmark will be in 2015, when we're hoping to repeat the exercise with potentially up to 30 to 35 cities. And one of the things we want to do finally is to build in more of a qualitative dimension, is to understand more about some of the issues that were raised already, about how cultural policy in particular has to play throughout other areas of policy in world cities, whether this is education, spatial planning, the economy, social welfare. Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you, Richard. Well, if I may, я оставил свои наушники на столе. My question was, you started your presentation saying that the mayor of London had read something from Shanghai and was concerned about competitiveness of a city in cultural dimension. And then you collected a lot of numbers, and I just wanted to clarify what do they evidence or witness, who's winning or who's losing in this competition? What do those indicators tell us? Because, I mean, they are coming from different dimensions, and you said that, for instance, in Istanbul, there's one museum, but 7.5 million visitors annually. And in Berlin, there are many, but just 4 million. Not quite clear how we should interpret all those numbers and indicators, because we always gather more and more data, and we do need them for measurement, but we don't understand who's won and who's lost.
Okay. I think there was about 4 questions there. So firstly, the issue about competitiveness. The Shanghai paper was very much culture is part of competitiveness. It basically said Shanghai has made huge developments over the last 20 years in education, in the economy. Now we do culture. You know, if we look at where we are in terms of culture, we're way behind our peers in terms of world cities. The London mayor has a sort of a less instrumental view of that, because culture is, I guess, deemed to be more multidimensional and more about the way of life of people in a city, as well as simply about how do you attract mobile international capital and talent. Okay, so that's the answer to the first question. The answer to the second question about how to interpret the data, one of the things you have to understand is that there is a real limit to the amount of data that you can collect and put into a report like this, because often you can get it for 3 cities, but you can't get it for 12. So, for instance, understanding of your major museums, what the proportion of locals to tourists is, for instance, quite important, because then you understand the way in which those cultural institutions are functioning. Are they predominantly for locals? Are they predominantly for tourists? In which case there is a much more economic rationale for, say, funding them, potentially. So a lot of that texture cannot be kind of captured in what we've done. So what we've tried to do in the report is essentially give a baseline, and a very detailed baseline, but still only a baseline to what is an incredibly complex area across cities in a way that's never been done before. And again, some of the differences in the numbers depends on what data sources were used. Now, we as kind of the coordinators would always try to stress the needs for comparability with our local partners. But at the end of the day, if, for instance, Istanbul wanted to use only government statistics for describing their cultural sector, it tends to be less comprehensive than other cities. So there are some issues again there that you've got to understand about where does the data come from, and therefore what are the limitations as well as the strengths of that data. And just ending up with the who's won and who's lost. Most of the cities who collaborated in the project don't see this as a zero-sum competitive game. So they're really not that interested in that debate. And that's why, if you read the report, you'll see that there aren't actually rankings in here. There aren't methods of representing the data that allow you to do that kind of ranking process. Of course, the cities can do that individually by themselves because they all have the data, but that's not really the point of gathering it. I think people wanted to have a platform for saying, hey, don't forget about culture. You know, culture is what makes cities distinctive. We've talked about in the other sessions a lot about culture, even though the other sessions aren't about culture. We talked about how important it is for brand, how important it is for identity, for cohesion. So I think this kind of forum and report gave a conduit to expressing that.
Спасибо, Richard.
Thank you very much, Richard. Irina Dmitrievna, you wanted to ask something? To Mr. Wachstein, a question to Mr. Wachstein. You know, maybe when you present, you could ask, I don't have a presentation, I'm just a panelist, and I just wanted to ask a question. You know, the two presentations were very interesting and insightful, and in the second presentation, what I found very interesting and exciting is that is to take into account this culture of day-by-day life. You know, in your research, did you consider this part of life, in cultural life, the issue, as you put it, of enlightened absolutism, is that in culture they refer more what the Department of Culture actually sticks to, but the specificity of today's culture is that these boundaries between traditional culture and non-traditional culture venues like restaurants, bars, and so on and so forth, and lots of other things, these things are not considered as culture venues. And also a serious discussion was initiated after the government announced destruction of small classes, for instance, painting classes and all, with just a couple of hundreds people attending. And the government authorities say that the attendance rate is not very high. Let's close these venues. So it seems that this comprehensive modern infrastructure of cultural life is ignored, and what is going, you know, grassroots things, you just you do not look at it, you do not analyze it, and in the outskirts of the city, and the specificity of them, the number of migrants and the general culture element and demographic data, did you consider it? Because without having this more fine-tuned mechanism, we will again have this average indicators. Do you think of these elements analyzing the culture environment? Thank you very much for your question. I didn't expect we start the discussion so quickly. Yes, I entirely agree, and I'm not saying that the culture of everyday life is not important. We are not speaking about this kind of life, but we are speaking about the sociology of day-by-day life and social practices, and how your natural cycle of life in a big city looks like, where you go and how you spend your time and how you perceive objects of city environment, what interests you, what doesn't interest you. So that's the starting point for us. But the goal of the challenge, if we are not speaking about politics, the challenge is to look at what happens at the institutional level with various offices, departments, and various venues, and this routine way of living in this city. You know, sometimes it makes a conflict, it creates a conflict. You know, Perm is a very good case here. Through culture interventions, we changed the day-by-day practices of living of the city, and thanks to this art intervention, people actually united around it and started the whole thing named Perm. We do not think that it's just only thinking about small people when we speak about day-by-day routine. That's what you know, this enlightened community thinks. But institutional infrastructure and day-by-day life, that's and their convergence, and what impacts what, and what we can change in the political system here. Of course, institutional infrastructure, you can change the mode of how institutions work, and through this you can change people's lives, and you can change environment and the space and change how people live. But this practice of day-by-day life in the city, and this thing, small is beautiful, and small locals, yes, those are very important things. But as an object of management, yes, of course, institutional large structures, that's what we're thinking mostly, what we're thinking of mostly. We have other presenters on the panel. I understand that the discussion is very interesting, and anyway, we have to continue with the presentation. Robert, could you please start your presentation?
First of all, thank you for having me here. I'm trying to be very fast, so I think we're a bit late. So when I'm clicking too fast, maybe ask me later. I'm still around, okay? So when I run into people and I'm with friends from Hamburg and from Cologne, they always ask where you come from. And it's Hamburg, like, oh, I like it. And in Cologne, it's always a bit church. And when you say we come from Berlin, it's always, ah. And I don't know what this means, ah. So people run into the city always try to find out what's happening there, that these people make this noise when you come from Berlin and said, ah, it's like you're having something. And I was born in Cologne, and Cologne was, well, totally later, totally before in another thing. Cologne is like an ugly dog. After some time, you love him. So, and then you move to Berlin, and in Berlin, then you're in a city. Cologne is more like, okay, it's a good neighborhood, friendly people, and in Berlin, you're into it. And then we have to look, because when you want to understand Berlin, you have to look in the history a little bit. So right now, Berlin is 775 years old. I think this is younger than Moscow. Moscow is over 800 years old. So it's still, in Germany, it's still a very young city. And when you see, okay, why this creative class right now is so overwhelming, you have to look that this city was, well, mostly destroyed. So what we found there was lots of free space, and the free space gives you a lot of possibility, and you don't have to pay that much, even, well, just drop in and you do some stuff. And you have a good transportation system. So if you want to have a kind of connected city going from A to B to C, it was very easy with the S-Bahn. I love this. In Cologne, you have the Straßenbahn. It's not that fast. But in Berlin, from through the city, you're very, very fast. So there was no limitation. And that's a bit like this photo. This was the feeling in Berlin about 10 years ago. Even today you can find something like this. And there was Klaus Wowereit said, okay, I'm going to use this. Said, okay, this city is poor but sexy. This is from 2003. Some people still believe that it's right now, believing that poor but sexy is still the main slogan for Berlin. So when you come to Russia or somewhere, said, okay, I know this, so I heard this, you're still poor but sexy. Well, we're creative, we don't like this. So it's not about poorness, yeah? It's more about getting rich. It's not only money when you're getting rich. So I think it's a very rich city, and it is sexy. But still today, people, well, I saw this in the newspaper on November 30, people still working with this energy. So in Berlin, it's all about creativity and less about money. So when you wandering around in Berlin, people start saying, okay, let's do it. Let's start, let's do something. But behind this culture and creative industries are the drivers for sustainable growth. I believe, and almost every city believes, so if you give some power to the creative class, it's not only energy, must be money maybe too, so there's a sustainable growth. So take it with Richard Florida, it's not only just to attract the creative class, but to give them the ability to make money. So it's all about the new creative class, and even some people say it's war for creativity. I think it's maybe a little war between the capitals. I think we're the creative in about 10 years, we're the creatives in about 20 years. I think they're kind of swarming around. Well, New York was up, New York was down, New York was up, London was down, was up. Berlin, maybe, right now we're up. Where's Moscow? Moscow is still there. It's my second visit here in this city. I love it. From the first, it's a great pattern, a great a screen, or a canvas. It's a great canvas, and walking through the city of Moscow is maybe the same feeling as the first time walking through Berlin, and lots of things going on. And I think when you put the right ends together, and there's a perfect network in the city. So that's my first feeling, first impression. First impression is always very important. What we do in Berlin is coordinating actors and activities. I think this is very interesting. So because some people are doing very good stuff, but they don't have the possibility to communicate this. We have to develop interdisciplinary cooperation. This is very interesting because you can learn from each other. So we do this with networks in Berlin a lot. Developing urban districts together with creative industry because, well, we're talking about master planning, but you have to involve all these people just to find out where they want to go, what they need, and what is there actually. So you have to know what is there. And of course, and I think in Berlin you can feel it on the street. I live in Mitte. It's totally, you don't listen to German anymore. You just hear Spanish, Italian, English, and so on. I love it because when you put billboards out of the city and you ask the people to come into the city, don't send them away when they're there. So using creative industries is for enhancing city attractiveness. So then we did this, we cluster all this. That's because when we're talking about the creative class, there are small, illustrators sitting at home doing this stuff, and we're talking about big agencies. So we have to define who's who, because we need another language for this when we're talking to one-man business companies and to business with about 1,000, 2,000 people. And then we built some networks in Berlin, just very special, like Create Berlin. Create Berlin is like interdisciplinary network for designers, fashion designers, illustrators. So we all bring them in one cluster. There's Berlin Music Commission, there's the Berlin Club Commission for all the club scene, there's the International Design Center, and of course all the marketing. These are just 6, they're more than these 6. So in the last couple of years, more and more networks divide. Once a year, we make like a New Year's welcome. We put all networks together and we all invite our members. So just to network in between the networks, because cities getting bigger, projects are getting more. So we try to do this. Come on. Too fast. Too fast. Sorry. Later. Okay, so I got some numbers from 2009. I asked for fresh numbers, but they will come in 2013. Sorry for that. I'm coming back next year. So in 2009, 29 creative industry changed their headquarters to Berlin. I think this is very interesting, even for Moscow. So if you're putting something up here, maybe it's interesting for international companies or national companies to just come here and to integrate all and to measure this all up. So 29,300, I think today maybe more business in Berlin right now, but this is quite a lot. And employees is about 140,000. So, and you feel it when you're getting over the street, and it's getting more. And these people attract other people invited, so they come and work at their business, their agencies, they're kind of international guests they invite for doing projects. And we have 22.4 billion euro income and some money. Coming back to the creative class and how to lost the word, how to build a bridge, or how to define the right I lost the word. Sorry for that. Yeah, let's call it outcome. So we trying to investment grants, supporting investment in the commercial sector. That's very interesting for us in Berlin. We're talking a lot about coaching and education. I think this is very interesting. We get to need this. Today we talked about young and old, how to integrate all these things. So in a creative city, and in a you need, on the one hand, you have to give them the possibility to have space. On the other hand, you need to coach them, because on some hand they're pretty young business companies and they need help. You need sponsorship of projects and artists. Not every project from the beginning on is a business plan. So some things just popping up. And I think as a creative city just need this, the space and the possibility and the money to do such projects. We're inventing local multi-targeted festivals. This is nothing new. Every city do this. I just circled some here. So we have everything about music. We have, of course, just right now we're working on the design week, because this is very interesting, because we can use this for a marketing worldwide, just to bring people in and to give even smaller business companies the possibility to show their stuff. And presentation on cross-regional and international markets. So Create Berlin is organizing, so we were in about, I think, 40, 50 exhibitions worldwide. We take designers, we take from fashion designer, interior designer, we grab them, 10, 12, 20, and we present them somewhere in another country and bring them together with people who has the possibility to make some business in the future. So this is very interesting, because we're trying to define together with the creative people new business. And working resources for cultural production. So there's a need for some culture production. There's a need for little spaces. Maybe who knows Berlin? There's a Beta House, so it's a kind of co-working space. There are several of those. So in the beginning, there was financed a little bit by the Senate, put some money in it. So, and this is a thing popping up in Berlin right now in every corner. So if it's the Oberholz, it's a big cafe in Berlin. When you go there, it looks like a computer shop, like an Apple shop, but people just working there, and up there, they renting space for a co-working space. And of course, you need venture capital for creative industries. I think you need a model, you need some formats to bring money into the market. Because when you bring money into this market, the thing will flourish and it will bring directly kickback. And what we're doing is, of course, distributing information. It's about the connected city. So there are some digital platforms like home pages or something like that, where people can just easily found out what's going on, who to speak to, and doing like this. So my conclusion is this: you can't schedule creativity, but you can create ideal conditions to attract the regional, the national, and I think that's very important, the international creative class to develop a creative industry with a sustainable growth. Thank you.
Thank you. Хала, наверное.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm happy to be here, but just before we start, we're supposed to have a very short film, just to get you into the mood and understand what's Tel Aviv all about. Can you put it on, please? Is it okay?
Tel Aviv, non-stop city. It's on.
Well, I'm just out of curiosity. How many of you have been in Tel Aviv? Anyone has been? Ooh, okay. I wouldn't believe so much. So now I didn't think so many people were there. Anyhow, I'll take the next 5 minutes to talk about creative Tel Aviv, creative cities, how it is connected to culture and to measurements, as we were talking before. So, as I said, my name is Hila Oren. I'm coming from Tel Aviv, the startup city. How does it play? Which way? Anybody can help me? Well, the location, as we like to look at ourselves, it's right in the middle of the world, between the east and the west part. Let's talk a little bit about the city DNA. This is how Tel Aviv looked just 100 years ago. 66 families on the sand dunes. They were entrepreneurs. They did a lottery. And this is how it started. Entrepreneur DNA just 100 years ago on the sand dunes. They dreamt of a garden city in a place that had no water. They dreamt of a city of the future in the homeland of the past. And as you see it now, in short, it was a classic startup. Big dreams, but quite small chances, I think. Surprisingly, they succeeded. The founders of Tel Aviv had a vision and did not care about reality. DNA, when we're talking about, each city has its own DNA, its own skeleton. But after talking about the DNA, we should look at the personality of a city. The personality is how the city itself feels. And Tel Aviv, the name is old and new, 5,000 years of Jaffa, and the combination of it is proud of our legacy. Even the name Tel Aviv means the past and the future. The White City. We were declared by UNESCO as the World Heritage Site, thanks to 4,000 buildings in the Bauhaus International style. This style was born in Germany and became a part of our culture. Well, 14 kilometers of beaches. Life is a beach when you're in Tel Aviv. Young city, 35% of the city is people between the age of 18 and 35. When you're talking about DNA, this is the DNA. 1,448 bars of nightclubs, one for every 228 residents. Is this culture? Is it not culture? Let's talk about it a little bit later. When we're grabbing all this together, the Tel Aviv personality is pluralistic, it's vibrant, it's innovative, it's young, and this is what it makes actually Tel Aviv the business center of Tel Aviv, of Israel, the gateway. When you fly into Tel Aviv, into Israel, you fly into Tel Aviv. This is what it says on your boarding pass. When you come to make a business at the stock exchange, you do it in Tel Aviv. This is our business center. But it is also the cultural center. This is a very new museum, design museum, curated by Ron Arad. But coming to think about cultural centers, before, when we wanted to measure, and the talk about measuring culture things, we would measure tickets for theaters, we would measure subscribers for libraries, things like that. I think now when we're talking about culture, we're talking about bottom up. Today, we're referring to entrepreneurs, to ideas, to social media. When we do a big event on the public space, you know how we invite the people? Only through social media. We don't put the press at all. 30,000 people just come by Facebook. This is a different way of measuring culture and different way of thinking about the presence of the people at the public space. These things, actually, we hear them more and more. We just heard it from Berlin, we heard it from London, we hear it from global cities all over the world. Miami, just 20 years ago, was a NAMI city. Now, Art Basel is just now, these days, bringing there more people by private jets than by the people that come for the football. That means global cities, as Professor Saskin Sasne, that was here 2 days ago, coined this word just 20 years ago, I think. It is not more about United States and Russia, it's about cities and the culture in cities. This is the way we should refer it. And when we move from the world of global cities into the creative class and attracting the creative classes, we're talking, of course, this is what we need, right? We want talent, we want technology, we want tolerance, we want all these people, and we need, if we want them, we must give them the opportunity to do what they want, to do their creativity in the city, in the public space. This is when we're talking about opening the city. These are open spaces that we just gave for students to make their exhibition outside in the public space. You won't believe what you're seeing this. This picture is the municipality hall, exactly where the parentheses is the mayor's office, and on top is a duck made by the community of cartoons in Tel Aviv, that they decided that it's their symbol and this is what they want, and we gave them the opportunity to do so. So when a local creative person in town feels he can do and he can implement his things, he feels that this is his town. Talent. This escalator is, do you know where it is? In the municipality hall. Some guy came with the idea and we gave them the opportunity. Of course, technology. We're going back to Startup City. Tel Aviv ranked a week ago second after Silicon Valley. What you see here is a library 60-year-old library, which was quite numb. People stopped coming because we know how libraries are now, okay? We renovated it. We just put a parquet on the floor and some new tables. Opened it last year as a co-working space. Already 3 terms of 30 startups working in that library, thinking of in a different way, out of the box, of things that are already happening in your city. Tolerance, of course. If you're not pluralistic, if you're not really open, if you don't give the opportunity for the people to live their own way, it just won't last. And Tel Aviv was chosen as the best gay city just last year. Let's think a little bit outside of the box. What Nike did in Tel Aviv spread out to the whole world. Tel Aviv is humid. It's not nice to run a marathon in the middle of the day. But we started a night run. You won't believe the energy that is going out at that night. And from Tel Aviv, it spread out to New York, to London, to all over the world. Let's talk a little bit about how global cities refer to culture. When you talked about your report before, I made a mixture with capital of culture. And we know when Liverpool was a capital of culture, just in 2008, they brought this big Spider-Man to walk around town. Thousands and thousands of people for 3 days went out to the streets to experience culture in a different way. How are we measuring culture? This is a different way to measure culture, but it's still very interesting and very creative, and again, pulls the creative class. A different way of Amsterdam looking at global creativity by making stairs and making people physical and going up the stairs. And of course, the Red October, which I made the effort to go just last night to see it in my eyes. Moscow is also referring and wants to be part of this whole big creative trend. Berlin, I was there just half a year ago. The 775 year was celebrated by diversity, by putting all the immigrants in the front as the stars. Again, this is a different way. Is it culture? We should ask ourselves. I think it is, because it attracts people to look, to think, to make something different. In Tel Aviv, we're working now very much on attracting students to come and learn in Tel Aviv. They are referring to the DNA of the city. As we said before, the DNA of Tel Aviv is entrepreneur, is a startup, almost 800 early-stage startups in the heart of the city, and 1 startup for every 500 residents. I must say, Tel Aviv is only 500,000 people and 3 million in the metropolitan. It's quite small to the cities that we're talking about. Just to understand, just 15 years ago, we were almost on bankruptcy. And in 15 years, we had this financial growth with AAA. That means that can be anywhere. So if we want to conclude this very specific and short presentation about creating cultural, we're asking ourselves, is culture is due to environment, due to spaces, due to institutions? I think it is all together, but we have to open the spaces of the city for culture. It is not only by tickets. It is not only by subscriptions. It is by social, by connections, by PR, by events, by entrepreneur, cracking the innovation code, allowing people to do what they think is culture. You know, people in Israel just knit around trees. This is their way to show their creativity. So thinking creativity, I think, is opening the city, taking the open spaces, referring to the DNA of the city, to the skeleton, and then taking to personality. Tel Aviv is a non-stop city. It's open 24/7. Some of us maybe have a feeling that it's not so safe. I'm telling you, and especially women, 2 a.m., Rothschild Boulevard, you'll feel the safest in the world. And this is part of our DNA, so we need to take it and express it. Otherwise, just like Moscow needs to take its canon, I think, culture and institutions. So let's keep all together, open to ideas. This is Rabin Square. It's the place where the whole country comes to demonstrate. We must be keeping open to everyone. And the most important, when we're talking about culture, when we were talking about measurements, about thinking how we want to proceed, we have to be open to the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Alexander.
Sorry.
Давайте у нас последний.
So now we have the last presentation of Alexander Dolgin. Knowing your softness, please be tough. Well, being the last to speak, I would allow myself to be tougher and more extreme than otherwise. You know what? There's a theory that what the state should do in the sphere of high art or culture, and the theory says that it better do nothing. Just give a little bit of money, more rules, and just leave. But that's about high culture, about professional culture. Why so? Because usually the state, especially democratic state, doesn't have enough taste to really lead the culture in the way it should go. I mean, to the place it should go, to the destination. But it's not true. For instance, when we speak about so-called self-culture or bottom low culture, that and I agree absolutely with the previous speaker, to give an opportunity to people to do what they want. And here we do require something from the authorities, the Ministry of Culture, the state. And exactly to set up the infrastructure of this reciprocity. And you know what? I was very happy to hear that the Ministry of Culture, with their leading expert, demonstrates their readiness to make steps in this direction, which is quite good, quite modern, quite humanistic, and right. To be quite candid, I didn't quite understand how those steps are going to practically be made. What really they are going to do besides just quoting research the juncture between institutional blah, 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 and the way people live. If the Ministry of Culture intends to research some joint junctures, not quite clear, though we do understand what they mean, it's not a policy. And the way I would view the policy here and the infrastructure and what it should be composed of, first of all, speaking about interactiveness, about interaction with people, you should somehow form the person you would like to interact with, because good, beautiful, humanistic sounds when we say people, and we're open to people, and where are them people? How do you know what the people want? And it's very expensive to find out what the people want, taking into account the fact they don't know themselves what they want, as a rule. So, to set up the subject for you to talk to is to form up the representative groups or circles or communities or societies or guilds or whatever, what's covered terminologically by the word club, because a separate person, it's very difficult for him to express what he wants and to publish his desire, and very difficult to insist on his position in competition with other wanting so or other arguments with the state. So there is a natural motivation of the people to unite and insist on their interests and fight for their interests, for instance, to go in for certain types of sports or saying whatever, or just record underground music they compose themselves. But currently, they just don't know how to do it. They don't know how. You have to give your hand to them, and the state should make an attempt to set up the infrastructure for this kind of interaction. And I can see several elements of the infrastructure. First, the infrastructure of feedback and just information infrastructure, which would allow us to find out who wants what. Second, material infrastructure, meaning that the spaces, the places, the people can get together. And the third one, management interface, social workers, analysts, the people who would arrange auctions or tenders in case if there will be, if there's a library and 2 or 3 different clubs pretend to take it. There was a session devoted to the measurement of culture, and a lot was said about that. I didn't understand about the generalized trust index. I didn't understand how it was measured and calculated, and I suspect that it's a utopia, B, you cannot measure it, and C, even if A and B are wrong, that it's the wrong indicator. Culture is not oriented, it's inachievable.
Maybe I'm wrong, but I didn't get it how you measured it. And the same thing I can say about all these components of culture, KPIs, key performance indicators. You know, large companies love such things, and but they do not succeed in doing this successful. And there are 4 reasons for that. And I'll articulate all of them. It's hard to combine all indicators together, and the most significant ones stay outside. And the weights, it's hard to put the rates, the adequate rates to these indicators, weights to these indicators, and manipulations. This system is prone to manipulations, and people love to, direct things into the area they would like to. And number 4, it's a very critical thing for culture. Situation is always changing, and you have to fine-tune your indicators all the time. So you have to have an army of analysts that will eat up all, major part of the budget. It's quite costly. I think there is an opportunity. We've almost achieved it. 2 things should be measured in culture. First, the volume of attention attracted. A couple of years ago, if you remember, our president said that we can give you money for shooting your films, cinemas, but we cannot bring people into the cinemas to watch your films. So let's calculate the volume of attention, and you can manipulate these things as well. But anyway, and the quality of this attracted attention. So the general goal of cultural activities is the quality and quantity of time that was spent consuming various cultural events and activities. Previously we didn't know how to find out whether people liked our events or not. We did it manually. 2,000 stickers with checklists. But now, today, the whole thing is easier. We have likes on Facebook and so on and so forth, and we can calculate and we will know how the whole picture looks like. But we work with demand, but not the production capabilities. We think that they are in demand, but actually it's not true. Thank you. Thank you very much. Irina Dmitrievna, would you like to say something? Unfortunately, we do not have enough time for discussion. I was prepared to be a discussion panelist, but I'm going to just say a couple of words. Yes, maybe you could make a short presentation of your experience. There is a series of questions of practical nature, and I'd like to maybe address some of our foreign colleagues here and our local colleagues. Maybe they could answer my questions. All these issues that were discussed, they are very important and significant for me, not only as publisher, but also as a representative of a charity fund. The Mikhail Prokhorov's fund works in regions, and it tries to systematically support culture in the regions. And the challenge is to understand the territory, the landscape, to know the specificity of each and every city and region. Not only official culture institutions that are important for us, and we should know how they feel themselves, but informal creativeness. This level is also important for us, and no one has ever tried to know how it lives. We actually receive lots of applications to conduct manifestations and various interesting events, and we do not. The work on this level is not very active, and I'm very interested in the following: if there are any research in Russia comparing various cities between themselves, industrial cities, for instance, what happens there with culture and demography, and cities, closed cities, mono cities, and stagnating cities. What's the specificity of all of them? Because everyone mentioned it. You know, culture industry is not only the level of comfort of living, but actually it's the main thing for our citizens. But it's something about new economy. Culture technologies can supplant previous old economy, and it's a business resource where comfortability and the level of comfort is converging with the investments. And one private institution, what it does, it tries to analyze the picture and to set up a systematic approach supporting this area, because nowadays we just have to do our own research when we enter a new region. Otherwise, all initiatives are just senseless. Moreover, this issue of the city of Perm, I admire Oleg Cherkunov for bringing this process, for making it a very trendy thing. But is intervention does it do any good in terms of local community? Do we know that the local community is prepared? If this intervention fails, then what will happen afterwards? What's the future of these institutions and new institutions? They might be institutionalized or just closed down by the governor. But the question of how to develop these institutions and how to work with local specificity, we want to do that, to conduct master classes, for instance, or this enlightened absolutism. We just bring things to places and just leave them there as they are. But this unwillingness to join people around these things, that's what they do not do. Just importing things without understanding local specificity is a challenge. How do you resolve this issue, this problem? What's the balance between importing and support from local communities? It might be not very active, but actually they are the citizens of the city, and they should influence their own city. That's what they want. I think it's a topic for a separate presentation. Of course, situation differs from one place to another. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time, and I'd like to wrap up this session. The only thing I'd like to say is that when we look at Berlin, Tel Aviv, and other European cities, capitals, and across the world, there are lots of cultural institutions out there, and we can also map them, but they are actively involved into the environment, and there is no question about how to make them work and how they should behave. But our 480 libraries, it's a problem for us. We're a bit nervous about how they live. Maybe we should stop being nervous. And Mr. Dolgin, he might be right. Maybe we just should start it like this. Those who apply to start something creative in Moscow, they will just start these activities in libraries, and the whole thing will start on its own. Maybe it's even cheaper than just collecting data incessantly. So, unfortunately, we do not have enough time, and the session is closed. Thank you.
Well, they took my idea for libraries.